Good afternoon. Darty, thank you so much for the generous introduction. It's wonderful to see you again. I think Rio is more beautiful than Boston, but okay. This is the TiECON East, you decide. I'm fine with that. Boston is a wonderful city as well. I'm just kidding. You know, next year, 2025, a very famous book by the New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman, we all know him, right? Is going to celebrate its 20th anniversary. The book was called The World is Flat. If we take a time machine from 2005 all the way to 2025, it seems to me that the title of the book would have to change. And I myself, in a panel session a couple of weeks ago, I was interacting with him, and he told me, well, if I was to write the book again, I would say that the title should be The World is Fast. So from the world is flat to the world is fast. But this question about the title of the book has to do with the notion that historians and economists and political scientists, philosophers, are always trying to summarize the spirit of the times, the most important traits of a particular point in history, by one or two words, right? In 1980s, for example, the great economist John Kenneth Galbraith used to say, the age of uncertainty. Fareed Zakaria, the famous CNN host, just published a work called The Age of Revolution. So we're always trying to find a name, a title, a label to describe the world we're living in. And one of the most accepted terms to describe the spirit of our times has been that of polycrisis. Originally, it's something that came up in the 1990s, and it related to the climate crisis. But for the past 5 years, let us remind ourselves that we've had the worst health-related challenge since the Spanish flu of the last century. We had the worst stagnation period since the 1970s. And there is in the world today a kind of geopolitical crisis that combines the most important threat to security in the heart of Europe since the end of World War II. Here, of course, I'm referring to the invasion of Ukraine. The Middle East is as hot a spot as ever, with the intensification of the conflict in the Gaza Strip and the hostilities between Iran and Israel. And apparently there is the emergence of a mega competition involving the West and China, or more specifically, the United States and China. And people like the historian Neil Ferguson says we have elements enough to name this competition a Cold War 2.0, right? So it's interesting because when Moses in the Bible wanted to have his people leave Egypt, there was one tragedy coming after another. But now it seems that many different terrible challenges, be it geopolitical or health-related, or related to the economy, are all converging at the same time. And that is why, for example, the World Economic Forum at Davos, there are so many panels titled Polycrisis. So when Darty and I were talking about the session here today, and obviously I don't want to just take a look towards the past, but something that is more prognostic in terms of what's going to happen over the next quarter century, I tried to frame the question, is there a way of looking this polycritical scenario as also a scenario of poly opportunities? And therefore, when we think of countries like India, or even my country, Brazil, there are 3 or 4 characteristics of how I think the world will unfold this next 25 years, this next quarter century, that actually represent poly opportunities. And we have to be mindful of those so we can take as much advantage as possible. So the first of this, I'm only going to mention three. There could be others, Darty, but I'm only going to mention three. So one of them is, we are residents of a planet where 8 billion people live. That's the global population of the world today, right? And over the next quarter century, we're going to be experiencing a very interesting paradox. Because if we were on First Avenue in New York City, between 46th and 47th Street, and we looked at the United Nations headquarters building, we would be able to count 193 different flags. Because today there are 193 countries in the world. And over this period of time that I have mentioned to you, next 25 years, population decline will be a trademark for most of these countries. As a matter of fact, population will decline in 184 countries out of the 193, right? Population is going to come down in Canada, in Mexico, in the entire South America. Population will decline in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe. Population will decline in China. But there are 9 countries in the world that are actually going to experience a populational increase that is so robust that at the end of the 25 years, when we are here meeting in the 2049 TiECON East, we are going to be residents of a planet where 10 billion people live. So we're going to have a net addition of 2 billion people over the next quarter century. And where is this population increase going to come from? So there's going to be some marginal increase of the population in the United States, also due to migration. So we're going to have something here. There is, of course, going to be population increase in India. By the way, India overtook China, as you know, as the world's most popular country last year, 2023. There's going to be population increase in Pakistan. There's going to be population increase in Indonesia. And all of the 5 other countries are from sub-Saharan Africa. Nigeria, Uganda, Ethiopia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Tanzania. 2 billion people extra in the world is a lot of people, right? You know what 2 billion people are? I don't know if you remember that film, Independence Day. It's a blockbuster from the beginning of the 2000s, right? Where you have this big unidentified flying object coming to planet Earth with some evil extraterrestrials. So 2 billion people is like one of those spaceships coming to planet Earth and brings another Germany, 80 million people, onto planet Earth. Then a bigger spaceship comes. It brings another Russia, 140 million people. Then another one comes, and it brings another United States, 350 million people. And then a real big spaceship comes and drops into the world, another China, 1.4 billion people. So that's what it means, the kind of populational increase that we're going to have over the next 25 years. But this demographical expansion alone is not sufficient to give us a picture of what I'm trying to say. Because if you take into account the question, where is the world's economic growth going to come from? And we relate 2 columns here. So one column to my right would be represented by the countries of the so-called G7, right? A group of countries that have been meeting since the 1970s. So who are the G7? The United States, Germany, Japan, France, the UK, Italy, and Canada. Last year, 2023, these 7 countries had a combined GDP measured at what economists call the purchasing power parity of $50 trillion. That's the combined GDP of the G7 measured in purchasing power parity terms. But now, if you take into account the combined GDP of what I like to call the E7, the 7 biggest economies of the world, so emerging economies of the world, so China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, they already represent a combined GDP of $60 trillion. And once again, when you compare the levels of acceleration, the speed in economic expansion in the emerging world and in the traditional post-industrialized world, the sources of growth in the emerging world will represent a bigger and bigger slice of the global GDP pie. And this is particularly true about India, right? Because if India grows north of 7% a year every year, it's going to double its income per capita over the next decade. And then a very important question will be asked. If India doubles its income per capita, which is now about $3,000 to $6,000 in 2035, India is going to eat more, India is going to need more water, India is going to need more energy, India is going to need more elements to make a viable transition to the so-called green economy. So India is going to have to answer the question, where's India's food going to come from? Where's India's energy going to come from? Where's India's water going to come from? Where is India's transition to green going to come from? And I'm obviously talking about that because I think there are wonderful partnership opportunities between India and a country like Brazil. And to conclude, I know I don't have a lot of time, just wanted to mention the third trend that I think will be with us over the next quarter century, which I think is enormously relevant, which is basically the notion that global value chains, global supply chains, value networks are being redrafted, right? We've got used to a world in which a volleyball was designed in Germany, its artificial leather came from Thailand, the glue came from Malaysia, the ball was put together in China, the packaging came from the Philippines, the ball was transported to its market destination by a Norwegian company, the accounting firm that operated this all would be headquartered in Ireland. The advertising agency for the global marketing campaign would be in Brazil. So actually, you can look at the ball and say, well, this ball is made in China. But in reality, the ball was made in the world. This efficiency network, because of geopolitical considerations, and because of the fact that China, which has been the manufacturing hub of the world for the past 25 years, is no longer a low-cost country, are going to make supply chains, value networks completely redesigned. And this creates an extraordinary opportunity for countries like India and for countries like Brazil. Let us not take only a critical look of what the future has in stock for us, because there are many opportunities if we scan the horizon. Thank you very much.